Hey Husker fans, it is probably the last cold day of this spring, but it's already summer on the Pick Six podcast with Tom Shatel. I'm Evan Bland. The venerable Sam McEwen is out this week, so it's a sort of a one-on-one setup here midway through the spring. How are you doing today, Tom?
Good. Just trying to stay indoors.
Yeah, the last day, right? Like you can turn on your sprinklers, tomorrow if you want to.
Yeah, well, it's not the last day. I think we all know that it's going to be cold again. So it's going
Okay. Yeah,
to be cold for the College World Series.
yeah. But we'll be begging for the cold here soon enough.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be hitting on a few different things. We're halfway through spring. We're going to talk about Frank Solich's return to Nebraska, touch on a little baseball at the end. But off the top, Tom, I wanted to ask you, we're 8 practices through now. Just generally speaking, what have you learned? What have been maybe some observations that you've taken away from players, coaches, what you've seen on the football side?
Yeah, I haven't watched any practice, so I can't give any insight there or any observations there. But just the coaches are all. I don't say they're all good interviews or good quotes, but they are. But they give good attention to detail. Every answer has something in it. And I think that's very useful for us, but and the reader. But I think it just shows that these guys, for them, attention to detail is important. I mean, it's a little thing; it's just a quote, but a lot of their answers go into detail, and they know what they want. They have a plan, and it's very impressive. But as I've said many times, these guys have been great so far. I just hope that they can coach, because if they can coach, it's going to be great.
Yeah, and it's the unity messaging too, I think, that strikes me where every guy is saying the same thing. And it, again, there were a lot of good things about the staff last year, but one of them was not necessarily unity of messaging. I mean, you heard a lot of different things from guys with experiences from all over the place, and you didn't know who was maybe going to contrast who on a given practice. And it just feels like it's the same consistent theme that we've gotten from all the assistants. And, I think we knew coming in that this staff was loyal to Matt Rule, but you start looking around and it's obvious on the field too. I mean, he's coaching the coaches. They're deferring to him and his leadership still. So many of these guys didn't necessarily take promotions to come to Nebraska, which has been the case. Oftentimes it felt like with previous staffs, a lot of these guys could have stayed in the NFL. They could have, Tony White could have stayed in Syracuse where he was successful. Marcus Satterfield was doing fine at South Carolina. It just feels like, there's a unity there, and the coaches clinic too. I don't know if you heard much from that, Tom, but the feedback that I heard from high school coaches was how detailed that was. And it just felt like there's, from the big stuff all the way down to the little things, they put a focus on every little thing.
Yeah, I agree.
How about, from the players' perspective, have you anything stand out from the guys that we've heard of so far?
Not really. Again, I haven't talked to many players. I was away on the NCAA tournament for a while, so I missed some the early stuff. But I think the players are generally impressed with things, and I enjoyed yesterday the kicker. Timothy Bleeckrow was talking about special teams coach Jed Foley and how much he wants to, or maybe it was the punter Brian Bershini. I get them all. I get all those guys mixed up. The kickers. Just talking about how he every day that they wanted to improve something, and he wants to go to the NFL. And there was a guy that Ed Foley worked with in the NFL that is really going to help them, but achieve their goal. The way they practice, the things they're trying to do. I've interviewed a few special teams coordinators over the years, but this was the most detailed I've ever heard a coach go into it. So, just what they want to accomplish every day, the punt returns, the kicks, the punts that go onto the 8-yard line, and he did it over and over and over, and I don't know. It just seemed like like you said, they've got a plan, and but it's fun to hear detail. I mean, we all love football. Everybody in the state wants to hear more and more about what they're doing, and these guys love to talk. They love to talk football, and they don't mind being interviewed, and they don't mind giving the fans a glimpse of what's going on. So, yeah, it all sounds good. I'm trying not to get too excited. Probably go 4-8 next year, but it's going to be a lot more fun 4-8.
Well, Foley's old school, right? Like from what we've seen at the open practices, I mean, he's the guy whose voice carries across the field. Like he's that guy that you would think of as like that hard-nosed high school coach, and Philly guy, loves the Phillies. He's talking about that before the session starts. But I think what's interesting about him too, Tom, is he's a guy who was a career college coach who spent 3 years in the NFL, and as he spoke on Tuesday about it, saying the value that he had working closely with special teams in the NFL. He talked about Johnny Hecker, the all-pro punter. And he's an interesting story because that was a guy that Brian Buschini has idolized for a long time. A year ago, before Ed Foley and Matt Rule were even on the radar, Brian Buschini was talking with us media folks about Hecker and a piece of advice he gave him in helping improve as a punter. So now you have the guy who coached Hecker coaching Buschini, and it sets up a really interesting dynamic there. But okay, so you talk about maybe they'll just go 4-8 again next year. Obviously, one of those things that have held Nebraska football back has been on the special teams side. What in your experience talking with different special teams coordinators over the years, seeing the different schemes, do you have a sense of what could be different about this group, or what makes this unit, or what could make it distinct under Ed Foley?
Oh no, I mean, Evan, we've heard this every spring, and
right?
We get excited every spring, and every time there's a new coaching staff, they have a new way of doing it, and the boy sure sounds good. I can't wait to see this. And we all thought Scott Frost's staff was going to be, they just came. Just came off a undefeated year at UCF. They were all geniuses. I mean, I just want to sit back and I'm not going to make any judgments on this thing. I'm just not. But I know everybody wants to hear it. But let's just watch. I mean, they're not going to. But as far as special teams, I like the fact that he wants to block punts, and he went into this great detail about what kind of punt returner that they have to have, and the qualifications. You have to be able to you've got to find the ball in the air first. Then you've got to not worry about getting hit, and you got to have confidence in yourself. And I mean, I just was fascinated listening to him talk about that kind of stuff. I think they're going to play starters, but they don't know who the starters are yet, obviously, and they won't until the fall. I think the detail is, I keep going back to that. We don't often hear that, so it's encouraging. But again, these are all first impressions, and they've been wrong before.
They have. That's true. You got to like the aggression, though, right? Like you talk about blocking punts and returning punts
Mm-hmm.
too. I mean, how? And I think you and Sam talked about it the other day after practice. But just how many fair catches has Nebraska had where you just sort
Yeah.
of give up and surrender 10 yards, whatever it might be? You like the mentality of taking a chance, right? And I thought it was interesting too. Ed Foley talking about even just on kickoffs, like they don't necessarily want just the big legged guy to kick it through the end zone for a touchback. Like they want
Right.
some directional stuff. They want to sort of tempt opponents into returning because they feel like they can make a play and they want to hit and they, want to put it in a spot where it's to their advantage. And so like, I don't know, I thought that was refreshing when it just felt like the last few years it's been don't screw up, don't screw up. And now
Mm-hmm.
here the staff, at least vocally, and there's a long way to go, but they're actively saying we want to win games because of special teams. And man, it feels like it's been a long time since Nebraska's been able to say that.
Yeah, the one thing I asked Ed Foley about yesterday was the fair catches. I said too many times Nebraska. There's been 10 yards of space between the returner and the guys coming at him, and they always fair catch. I said people get tired of fair catches. He said, "Well, we don't do that." So they're gonna expect the guys to catch it and go. I'm make somebody miss and go. Um, it's just they're going to try to block punts, and when you try to block punts, it helps set up returns down the road because then the punt team has to try to worry about the punt being blocked, so they've got to keep more guys in there to block, and that's why they release early. So it's a common sense approach. Everything is it sounds like basic football to me, and I'm all for it.
Hmm. Feels like it's been a fairly low drama spring too, right? I mean, we've had years where there have been injuries or, you know, position battles, I guess it felt like, and there's really been none of that. I mean, Rule has come out and said that he's not even considering a depth chart until the fall, and it makes a lot of sense. Why that would be, but I don't know. Does it feel kind of routine to you? Like to this point, it just feels like they're getting into football. The spring game's a few weeks away.
Well, I mean, this is how it had to be, and we all knew this. They've got to learn how to block and tackle. We can't worry about who's playing quarterback or who the depth chart. They can't worry about any of the games next year or any of that crap. They've got to learn how to play football again. It's been too long. I think if you go back to the Iowa game last year, there certainly was some good football going on there. Effort at the end of last season was better. They tackled better. I thought Bill Bush had a great impact on that defense. The defense played really well toward the end of the year. So it got better, but there's a long way to go. I just think they're starting from scratch. It's just like you take a bunch of guys who don't know how to play football and you're trying to teach them how to play football. Not quite the case. And even they've said that they've inherited guys who gave effort, and there's a lot of things here that they can work with. But but it is true in some cases. This is a program that has to learn how to win. They've got to learn how to compete. That's what the spring is about. What about it last Sunday? They've got all these games set up. Everybody's trying to turn everything into a game, a big competition. That's great. Who wants to compete and who wants to hit? That's what the spring is all about.
Right. And they went live last Saturday, and
Mm-hmm.
we saw
Yeah.
it in the open portion of Tuesday's practice.
Yeah.
There were a lot more green jerseys out there, right? Which means there were some guys that took some hits and were a little nicked up, but that's kind of what you want to see at this point in the year, especially with the new staff
Yep.
evaluating some new players. All right. So one other thing that Matt Rule and this program have done, and Trev Alberts, the AD, is they're bringing back Frank Solich to the spring game, and they said that'll be paired with another special announcement as it gets closer to the event. So we'll see what that is. But what did you hear? And you wrote a good column on it, Tom, about how Nebraska didn't necessarily just fire Solich, but it fired the way that it played football for decades. So what does it mean to have Frank Solich back in Memorial Stadium in front of the fans on April 22nd?
Well, I guess it could be closure in some ways. It doesn't end the curse. Like I said, the curse was, and firing for Solich was symbolic of this, but the curse was Nebraska willingly and knowingly going away from what worked all those years. And Steve Peterson started it. Tom tried to bring some of it back, but I don't think Bo Pelini was really interested in what Nebraska had done before. And then Sean Eichhorst had no idea. And I don't think Bill Moose did either. So finally, okay, we talked about before, physicality, fundamentals, the competition, all those things have to come back. And they are coming back. It feels like Matt Rhule and his staff are the most Nebraskan of any coach they've had since Solich. So it all kind of vibes together. It all fits. It's a great time to bring him back because they're seemingly finally going back to what they used to do when they were winning all those games. So I think it's great. I think it does finally, put to rest the idea that there's that he was wrong. Of course, he was wrong. In some ways, obviously, if you don't believe he should have been fired. But I don't know. I've talked about this so much, like I don't even know what I want to say. It's good to have him back. It won't mean they're going to win 10 games next year. It won't mean that there's some curses off. It's the right thing to do, and Nebraska's getting back to doing the right thing to do. So, and I think it speaks well for Matt Rhule that Frank wants to come back. I think he's had several good conversations with him, and he likes where it's going. He thinks it's going to be good. So it all ties together.
So I was in college during the Callahan years from 04 to 07, essentially. So I remember Frank Solich growing up and watching him on TV and everything. I'm curious, though, and I've met him a couple of times. He was at the Boys Town event for the Outland Trophy a few years ago, and so it was cool to see him back there. But I'm curious if you have a couple stories to share from back in the day, coaching Frank, what he was all about, just sort of in the day to day.
Not really. No, I always enjoyed Frank more off to the side than he was not a guy who was going to wow you in front of the microphone. But yeah, I can't say that I have any really interesting stories about him. No.
Okay.
If I think of any, I'll let you know. I can't right now.
All right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's cool that he's back, and we talk about attention to detail. It feels like this is just another one of those things. This was a Matt Rhule and Trev Alberts concoction to bring him back, and like it's not necessary, right? Like the staff would have done fine and would continue to do its thing, whether he was on the sidelines on April 22nd or not. But it's just another like little extra thing that maybe can provide some closure for fans. Because, you think about all the coaches since then, and there's really none of that, right? Like people aren't clamoring for Bill Callahan to come back. They're not clamoring for Bo Pelini to be back on the sidelines to acknowledge the crowd. Like there's just something symbolic about it. And if that furthers this notion that everyone's pulling in the same direction and that the administration and the fan base is as unified as it's been since 2018, maybe, or maybe you go all the way back to the early 2000s. What can it hurt? And so to have them there to put that forth, that effort to me, it's just another example of how this group seems to take the small things just as seriously as they take the big things.
Yeah, and I wouldn't give Matt Rule any kind of credit for this. I think he does indirectly because I think Frank liked him, but this is all Trev Alberts. And from the day he was hired, he wanted to do this. It's taken him 2 years to do this. Scott Frost was on board with this too, I think, trying to get him back, but he didn't want to do it because he didn't want the attention. He didn't want to stand out in front of the crowd, wave, and it just wasn't him. And it's not. But this is just, this is different than any other coach. This is a guy who was recruited by Bob Devaney. He played for Devaney. He coached for Osborne during all the Warriors. And then he became the head coach. I've said they should name the locker room after him because nobody spent more time there than Frank Solich. And so I do feel like that there's a little bit of, maybe from the fans, I don't know about Trev. I think for Trev, it was the right thing to do. And obviously, I'm sure Tom has been in his ear, Tom Osborne. But this is, Trev is a really big Osborne guy.
Mm-hmm.
And this has Tom's hands all over it. It's the right thing to do. It's, I think maybe from some people, maybe from Nebraska's standpoint, there's some guilty feelings here. Okay. One of their own, one of the true oil Huskers was treated poorly. When you're head coach, you're hired to be fired, but the way it went down, a winning year, 9-3. I think there's probably some a guilt that goes along with that. So does this take away that? No, it doesn't change what happened, and it never will. But again, it's the right thing to do, and I think we can all move forward. Stop looking back, move forward. Maybe that's the idea here.
And I think it's another reminder too, Tom, like the dynamic of the AD coach sort of relationship is in a good spot for Nebraska, where you've got Matt Rule, who's, by all accounts, an outsider. He's not from this area. He doesn't have ties to Nebraska. Obviously, he's ingratiating himself to the people and the tradition. But the caretaker of the tradition and the history is now sitting in the AD chair, which is really fascinating to me because, people maybe could have told Matt Rule about Frank Solich, but Trev Alberts knows what happened and he knows what that means to the fan base. And so, to have that guy be the one to reach out and have the current coach being welcoming to that, it's just a really interesting dynamic and one that Nebraska hasn't had in a while.
I agree totally.
So it's really interesting in that way. Yeah. All right, let's switch real quick to baseball here, Tom. And I know that's especially college baseball. It's not a sport that people maybe pay attention to until March Madness is done. That's kind of the history of it, especially in the colder weather areas like this, where it's just now getting up to be sort of comfortable baseball weather this week. But I'm curious, I follow the team, I cover the team regularly. I'm curious from your perspective, as sort of a casual observer to this point, you've had a lot of other stuff going on. What have you made of this team? What sort of stands out to you from what you've seen so far?
Well, I don't have a lot to offer there, but you're right. I haven't paid that much attention to it. I've tried to pay a little bit. They have some good wins. Obviously, Vanderbilt was one. Last night was another. They took 2 out of 3 from Illinois, and that's a good start. But they aren't the big. My impression of Nebraska are when they came into the league, they were kind of the big dog in the Big Ten. and that they didn't always act like it. They found out very quickly that the Big Ten wasn't impressed. But there are, they're going to Michigan now. Michigan's arguably the top program in the league. It's not Nebraska. They've been to the World Series a few years ago, and now they've got a new coach. We'll see how that works out. Iowa is good or better than Nebraska right now. So they've got now a couple of years ago they won the league, but I don't know. I think this is a good year to find out if they just got hot that year, if things just had the right chemistry, or if the program is really ready to go back and do that again. And this is a big weekend for them.
Yeah, it is. It's essentially halfway through the season. We talk about halfway through spring football. We're halfway through the regular season for college baseball too. They'll have a couple midweeks the rest of the way, but essentially their non-conference season is over. So you get it's win in the Big Ten. They're 16-9-1. You mentioned the series win over Illinois, but this is, I think, when fans will start paying attention, because again, it's going to be 60s and 70s. They have some games at Haymarket coming up in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
And it's a fun team. And I would say, especially for casual observers, enjoy these last few weeks of Max Anderson, because he's going to be a high draft pick here in a few months. I think you could say the same thing about Bryce Matthews, Jace Kaminska, who's their Saturday guy. I mean, they could have a number of draft picks here this summer. And you're right, Tom. You think about the 21 team and how dominant they were. But if you were a doubter, you could say, well, some of these guys were Darren Erstad recruits, or it was a weird league only season. How do you sort of factor into that? And then they have the down year last year. So I think it's been encouraging when you talk about sort of what you could project Nebraska to be under Will Bolt long term, where they're just, they're kind of balanced. Their defense has been solid. The pitching just recently is really starting to round into shape beyond their two aces, and they've got some depth of hitters too. So it's, it feels like this is the point where you could start making a run, but because you played a fairly weak non-conference schedule, some of it through just the fact that the teams you played aren't as good as they've normally been. There's some pressure on these weekends, so it should be fun. Haymarket Park on a Friday night's a fun place to be, right? Even if you're just a casual fan.
Absolutely. It's still magical. Absolutely.
What did you think of the legends coming back? I know you weren't there, but Darren, Erstad and Shane Comey and Alex Gordon having their jerseys retired there on that left field wall.
Yeah, I love that. And I wish they could and I've written about this before. I wish that there were more of those type of banners and things around the ballpark, but apparently they're not allowed to do that. Have a College World Series, have a logo somewhere, or their what they've done on the outfield walls, or maybe flags or something. There's some kind of agreement with the city of Lincoln or the ballpark that it's supposed to be generic. So, but yeah, I love that. I love the history. I love having those guys back. It's great to see Comey. I hadn't seen him in forever. At least 20 years. He had the Hawaiian stuff on. It was just very cool. I like that, and it's fun to see Nebraska baseball history. There's been a lot of it since 1999. So, I wish I could have been there.
In what way do you think college baseball has changed since the glory days of Nebraska baseball in the mid 2000s? Because a lot of it's cyclical, right? Since that time, they've had the bat changes where home runs at the College World Series were almost non-existent, and now it's exploding across the game again. Technology has obviously come a long way in terms of scouting and shifts and things like that. Do you feel like what Nebraska did in the 2000s to get where it did translates to today's game, or are there differences? Kind of like we talk about with football, like what they did to succeed in the 90s. A lot of that maybe has changed. Do you feel like that's the same conversation with football, with baseball, or is that formula to succeed fairly similar in your opinion?
Oh, I just think it's just harder because more teams are good. More teams care. More teams in the Big Ten are a lot better than they were 10 years ago.
No doubt.
Yeah, more teams have got facilities. They put more into baseball. Look at UNO. I mean, they're not an easy out by any means. They've already beaten Nebraska, so you used to count on UNO to be that midweek W. Now it's hard to put a resume together with a lot of W's because everybody's good. So yeah, I think the short list for the hosting regionals and the World Series isn't there anymore. It's really expanded, and you can't be surprised anymore by who makes it to Omaha. What I'd like to see happen is Nebraska get to the Big Ten tournament and let's make this event a big deal in Omaha. I just think Nebraska has a certain responsibility, and they maybe didn't ask for it, but by trying to bring the tournament to Omaha, they kind of did. They need to help. They need to be there every year, and I feel like the event just hasn't quite taken off yet because Nebraska has been so up and down and have not always been there. So that's to me would be, let's put aside the talk of the hosting regionals and World Series and stuff, and try to be on top of the Big Ten every year, that type of team that comes to Omaha every year. So, as much as I'm not crazy about Big Ten baseball, that's where we live now. That's where things are, and so I just like to see them. I guess expand their role in the Big Ten, but it's harder because more teams care. So, and there's more talent now that goes everywhere. They just don't go to the big boys. And I wonder about the NIL, how that's going to play into things. I'm sure schools like LSU and Vanderbilt are very serious about NIL and baseball, and maybe others aren't. So, Nebraska, I don't know where they stand on that, but I'm sure some are probably getting some, but it's still kind of new, the NIL thing. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, my impression of like Nebraska baseball's NIL is that it's very grassroots, I suppose. It's sort of what NIL was intended to be, where guys are doing some commercials. I think he had a couple guys last year doing some spots for restaurants and things like that. I spent a day at the College World Series last year asking a lot of the star players kind of how much NIL activity they got. And quite honestly, even a lot of the top guys don't get a ton in college baseball. And maybe that's improved in a year. But as I know that Tennessee has its own baseball collective. LSU is obviously a strong player there, but there's not a ton of that activity. So it's sort of a humbler version of what we've seen in football and basketball. Interesting point about the Big Ten tournament, though, Tom. I mean, you remember 2019 was the last time Nebraska was there. They make the Big Ten semis against Michigan. I think there were like 16,000 people in the stands that day. I mean, it was cool.
Right.
It was a cool event. And then COVID in 2020, they don't have a tournament in 21. And then, of course, Nebraska doesn't make it last year, just falling short, finishing ninth as Purdue and Maryland have a canceled game that affects their outcome, 600 miles away. So maybe this is the year. It sure seems like this is the year that they'll get back into that. All right. One other question on college basketball. UConn wins the national championship over San Diego State. From a Nebraska perspective, Tom, what did this NCAA tournament tell you about Nebraska's chances moving forward in terms of being a tournament team and taking that next step under Fred Hoiberg?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it told me anything that I didn't already know, and that is if they ever if they get their act together, that they can be in the tournament. It hasn't changed. It's not anything. They're in the right conference. I mean, they get 9 teams. It's almost it's almost hard not to make the NCAA tournament in the Big Ten. My God, so you have to be trying hard not to be in there. So Nebraska's done some things but they finally, I think he's got it together now. But he's going to hit the portal hard, and we'll see. There's a lot of interesting rumors out there, a lot of talk. So they can do it, but my gosh, he needs so much still. Um, point guards and big men and the guys who can shoot threes, and there's just a long list of things he needs, and he can certainly get them. But then he's going to put it together again. Every year is sort of like a new year. I think I'm not. I don't know if they can make the tournament. I don't know who's even on the team right now. So I don't.
Sure.
But yes, what it tells me is, you can make the tournament, but boy, winning that first game would be hard because there's a lot of Florida Atlantics out there who don't care who anybody is, and certainly, the Big Ten champ, I didn't make it to the second weekend, so
Right.
it's again, and that's a whole other topic about the Big Ten basketball, but it's available to Nebraska if they would just get it together. This past year they were pretty close. They could have been right there at the end on the bubble. Had they not had those two injuries early, and they needed the Tominaga going earlier, I needed to get him back next year. But so what it tells me is what I already knew. It's available if they start playing basketball.
I guess what I would add too is like it feels like, and this bore out over the tournament, like there's fewer dominant teams in men's college basketball, but there's more depth because, like you're saying, people care more. Schools are investing more money in facilities and coaching salaries. So it kind of strikes me almost more as like it's harder to make the field because there are more programs that care. But man, once you're in, like anything can happen. We saw another 16 take down a 1. Florida Atlantic nearly plays for the championship. Like if you get in, it's a total crapshoot, in my opinion. Like you look at
it's a sport that's not run by facilities like college baseball is. It's a sport run by the NIL and the portal. Right now, the portal is absolutely blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's in, and all these rosters will be. These coaches have to recruit their own players to stay. And they have to go find guys who are out there. It's these coaches used to be off until they would recruit till April 15th, and then they would be off for a little bit. Now there's no more of that. So yeah, it's a sport run by the portal and the NIL, and UConn's got a lot of both. So does Creighton, and that's how it works. The Big Ten, I don't know if the NIL how big the Big Ten always seems to be lagging behind on a lot of stuff. I'm not sure how big the NIL is there. I think it's getting bigger. But Michigan Center, Dickinson entered the portal. I mean, it's just crazy. So, it's not hard to if you can you have the money and you have the right coach who can bring players in and offer playing time. You can put a team together and get in the tournament. It wouldn't take that much, but that's what's facing Hoiberg right now.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up at that. It's been a little bit of a slower week. I think next week we're going to be back into spring ball for some more. It's coming off of the big baseball series at Michigan, and we're just going to start inching a little bit closer to the summer, a little bit closer to maybe drawing some conclusions finally with the football team down the road. We'll have Sam back next week as well. Maybe touch on a little bit recruiting and a lot of other items going on around Nebraska athletics. For Tom, I'm Evan. Thanks for listening to the Pick Six Podcast.